Alright, I am back with another video, and today we're doing the next and third video in my companion build lineup. We're building for Jaheira. Now, Jaheira was one of the interesting ones that we wanted to build on stream because there was actually a little bit of debate. Obviously, when you build, like, Jaheira, you think about, you know, everything that she's about, your first impressions of her. I mean, she's a druid, obviously, who dual-wields scimitars. Okay, so you immediately think, okay, melee martial druid, you immediately think circle of spores. That would be the obvious thing, right? And that was what we all initially leant towards, but then after a little bit of thinking we thought, actually, circle of spores doesn't really fit her character, or just her general vibe. She's not really about, like, you know, death and, like, you know, spreading necrotic stuff and all that. So we kind of had to do a little bit of deliberation and kind of think, okay, how do we make this work for her? And I think we came up with something really, really interesting. Something that incorporates all of her unique gear, her story, her background, some lore from the previous games, and as well as just kind of making a very well-rounded character. So I really, really hope you enjoyed this one. Again, this was created over on a live stream as a part of a community effort. If you want to be a part of making these builds in the future, please do check out the live streams when they are up, I guess. Anyways, let's get into the build. Now, I'm going to be breaking a slight rule of the kind of origin and companion build series here, as we're not going to be starting with Druid. I actually do want to start with Fighter. Fighter is going to give us a few things, namely our fighting style, which we are going to be taking to weapon fighting. Now, for those of you who are on the stream, you may be thinking, well, actually, we don't need to take two weapon fighting with the strategy that we're going for, which we'll get into in a minute, but actually, with the way certain things work, we are going to need it, so pick up two weapon fighting here, because we are going to be dual wielding with this build, but perhaps not in the way that you expect. Also, going with Fighter is going to give us a bunch of stuff that we want, but namely Constitution saving throw proficiency, which is going to be really nice for this build. As for the stats, they're a little bit strange, but it'll make sense once we get to the equipment and the like. But for now, Dexterity is at 16, it is going to be our main attacking stat with our melee weapons. Constitution is at 14, I think this is a pretty good level. We are going to be a mix of a spellcaster and a martial fighter, so we do want Constitution to be at least around 14. 16 would be nice, and you do have room to put it up to 16 later on this build if you want. We are getting 3 feats with this build, so you can do that if you want, but 14 with our Constitution saving throw proficiency, and eventually we will be also getting advantage on Constitution saving throws, so 14 is pretty good overall, but if you want to bump this up a little bit, you can. Strength and Intelligence are both at 8, as we don't need them. Wisdom is at 17. We are actually going to be getting a way to bump this up to an 18 as well without needing an ability score improvement, and then we can bump it up to 20 later, so stick around for that. And Charisma as it is at 10, with Jaheira being the leader of the Harpers. I would have liked this to be a little bit higher, but unfortunately with the stats that I mainly wanted to get, this is just kind of how it worked out, so at least it's not at 8. As for our skill proficiencies, Jaheira comes with the Soldier background, meaning that we get athletics and intimidation. I've gone for insight and perception. Perception feels perfectly at home for a, like, kind of warrior group leader druid, and insight because she knows when people are lying. It's literally part of her first cutscene you ever see with her, so you know. With our starting level of fighter, I do want to go immediately over to druid. The cool thing about Jaheira is the fact that you will acquire her basically at the end of Act 2, start of Act 3, so you will already have at least a decently high level of her, so the building curve for this shouldn't be too bad. You basically are going to be starting off at most likely around level 8 with this build, so you can kind of do the progression however you like. So I'm personally going to be going into the druid levels first because I think it makes sense to keep going with Jaheira as a druid because that's her whole thing, but if you wanted to start with the fighter levels and then do the druid levels throughout Act 3, you absolutely can. However, I'm going to be starting off with druid levels. So with druid, we're going to be getting a few things, namely cantrips. We don't need Shillelagh as we're not going to be using a club, although I do like keeping Form Whip around to pull enemies closer into melee range for us. And as well, I'm also going to be picking up Produce Flame. This build is going to have a little bit of an ice and fire theme to it, which is kind of cool. So Produce Flame is going to be quite a nice cantrip here. As for our prepared spells, we do get a few, and I want to pick up Speak with Animals because we're a druid, of course I do. I also want to pick up Ice Knife. Again, she does kind of have an ice theme here, with Ice Storm being one of her default spells, so picking up Ice knife here makes perfect sense. Create a Destroy Water in a similar vein can also be pretty good if you want to make creatures vulnerable to your cold damage attacks and also potentially freeze them. Although we do have fire damage as well on this build, so you may find this to be a bit cumbersome to try and manage, but it absolutely can work. This build is going to have multiple different modes. It's going to kind of have like a melee combat mode, a spell casting mode, a fire mode, and an ice mode, and you kind of have to mix and match and decide what you want to work at different times, so feel free to play around with these spell slots, or these prepared spells as you like. And finally, you can kind of pick up whatever you want here as your kind of final spell. Healing spells could be good, Thunderwave, Fairy Fire, it can all work. I'm going to go with Long Strider just because I like having that bump to our movement speed, but you probably already will have a character in camp or in the party that can cast Long Strider if you've been using my other Origin builds, so you may feel like you don't need this too much, but I'll pick it up here anyway. At Druid level 2, we are going to be picking our subclass, and, well, as we already said, we're not really too keen on Circle of Spores. Circle of Spores would be good, you'd get temporary HP, you know, the reaction attack, you know, the extra necrotic damage, but again, we didn't really feel like this is what Jaheira was about, at least from her character standpoint, and Circle of the Moon is kind of more Halsin's thing. Jaheira spends a bit more time outside of Wildshape than she does in it, at least in Baldur's Gate 3, contrary to Halsin, who just likes to be a bear, so we actually decided to go for Circle of the Land. Circle of the Land is actually going to give us a bunch of really cool things. We get the usual wild shape stuff, but we also get natural recovery, allowing us to replenish expended spell slots while out of combat, a bit similar to Wizard's Arcane Recovery, which is quite nice. We also do get another cantrip as well, and I'm going to pick up Guidance because it is just a very useful all-around cantrip. And we also do get an extra spell, and the game has picked Fairy Fire for us, which honestly I'm not going to argue with. We don't have a concentration spell yet, and advantage on attack rolls is certainly a nice boon. At Druid level 3, we finally get access to level 2 spells, but we also get access to our Circle of the Land feature here, which allows us to pick a domain and pick up extra spells from it. We have Arctic, Coast, Desert, Forest, Grassland, Mountain, Swamp, and Underdark, which all give 2 spells each. I'm going to be personally going with Coast. Coast is going to give us access to 2 spells we wouldn't normally have access to, which is Mirror Image and Misty Step. Misty Step being really useful for getting around the battlefield or just the map in general whenever you need to as a bonus action, and Mirror Image allowing you to bump up your armor class by 3 for each duplicate, and you know how Mirror Image works. This is actually going to be one of the more important spells here. We're going to have a way to cast this spell pretty much whenever we like, and it's really going to help us with our survivability as a martial fighter, but it's just a nice spell to have up in general, so I feel like Coast is a pretty good domain here. I would also argue Arctic could also work, although we do get these spells anyway from the spell list. And yeah, none of these really speak to me. I think Underdark is the only other interesting one because it gives you Web. So, but honestly, I think Coast is the best one. Speaking of our spells, we do get to pick another couple of spells now, and I'm going to pick up 2 that I think are extremely important for this build. Flameblade and Hold Person. Flameblade is going to be how we dual wield with this build. Flameblade allows us to conjure a flaming scimitar, which is perfect for Jaheira, it's another scimitar, that deals fire damage and counts as a fire spell attack. This is going to synergize with some equipment we're going to get later, and this is going to be how we're going to be getting our dual wielding with Jaheira. Normally, and this is again, you kind of have to decide when to use Flameblade. Flameblade is really awesome, it's going to enable some parts of this build, but it's also going to hamper others. Again, if we're trying to do ice damage shenanigans, that won't work. If we're trying to do things like plant or spike growth surfaces, that won't work because it will burn them away. So you kind of have to pick and choose when using Flameblade is the most appropriate. Combining it with Hold Person, which is going to allow you to do critical hits against humanoid enemies and stop them from moving, you can have a very powerful kind of flurry attack using both your main hand weapon and Flameblade. And Flameblade is also the reason we got to weapon fighting. Now, normally, since Flameblade is considered a spell attack, if you wield it in the offhand, you don't actually need 2-weapon fighting, because 2-weapon fighting is for weapon attacks, not spell attacks. However, if you cast Flameblade during combat, it is forced into your main hand spell slot, meaning that your main weapon, which isn't Flameblade, it's a regular weapon, will be forced into your offhand, meaning that you need 2-weapon fighting in order to use it effectively. Now, this doesn't matter if you cast Flameblade ahead of time, before you enter combat, if you have like a bit of setup before you enter a known encounter, which you can quickly swap Flameblade over without spending an action. But In this case, I decided to just kind of have it as a failsafe, because sometimes you do walk into encounters without realizing, and you don't want to feel like you're nerfed just because you have to spend an action to swap your weapons around. So just getting 2-weapon fighting here basically is a band-aid patch for that. So these 2 spells are quite important for this build. A reminder, Flame Blade does not cost concentration, unlike Shadow Blade, so you still have access to your concentration spells even with this up. Next up, at Druid level 4, we're going to be getting a few things, namely a cantrip, and I'll go with Poison Spraying. We get another prepared spell at this level, and Spike Growth for a bit of battlefield control will never ever go amiss. This is one of my favourite kind of Druid spells. Again, I really like playing battlefield control Druids, using things like Spike Growth and Plant Growth, as Spike Growth is going to be perfect here. As for our feat, I'm going to be saying, because we're mainly leveling up Druid at the moment, let's bump up our Wisdom. If you don't have the main weapon that we're going to be using on this build yet, you could use Jaheira's default weapon, the Sylvan Scimitar, which uses her Wisdom modifier instead of her Dexterity modifier for attacks, so you won't feel like you're falling too far behind. And with this, plus the equipment we're going to be using later, you'll already have 20 Wisdom without the need to mess around with any more stats if you do this now, so it feels pretty good to me. And yeah, that's pretty much it. At Druid level 5, we get to pick another Circle of the Land domain, and we're going to be going with Arctic. Arctic again kind of fits into that ice attack Druid theme that Jaheira has, giving us Sleet Storm, which allows us to call forth a storm that disrupts the concentration of spellcasters, doused fires, and creates ice surfaces. More battlefield control for us. It does require concentration, which kind of sucks, but again, it depends on what you want this build to do. If you want this build to be a spellcaster that's doing battlefield control while also dealing out offensive spells, then Sleet Storm is actually a really good concentration option. If you want to be a more martial fighter though, Haste is going to be awesome. I mean, obviously getting haste on any build is great, but this is going to give us an extra action. We're going to get a bonus to our armor class. We're going to get a bonus to our movement, making us really effective with martial fighting, especially when we're dual wielding. Getting a bunch of main hand and offhand weapon attacks off is going to be great for us. As for our prepared spells, we do get an extra couple now, and I want Plant Growth. Plant Growth is going to allow us to have a ton of battlefield control, basically making a plant growth surface with anybody who's within it having their movement speed quartered, which is really strong. It means that you can basically lock down melee enemies if they're far enough away from you. As well as picking up another spell, you can kind of pick up whatever you like here, it really doesn't matter. Moonbeam is another great concentration option if you feel like you just want to have more overall damage, and maybe you don't want to have haste up. So you could cast Moonbeam, kind of get that extra radiant damage in, and go ham with your weapons if you want. You have a lot of kind of maneuverability of this build. No spell is absolutely essential, so you can play around with different options and see what you like. In the combat footage that I have for this build, you will see me kind of switch up strategies mid-fight, and it works pretty effectively. And finally, at Druid level 6, we're going to get access to a couple of things, namely Landstride Difficult Terrain, meaning difficult terrain no longer slows us down, and we also gain access to Jaheira's iconic Panther form. We couldn't not get it, allowing us to take the shape of a panther that can prowl around invisibly. It has a starting health of 45 hit points and increases every 2 Druid levels. And that's the problem. Unfortunately, the Panther form, especially around the time you'd have Jaheira in Act 3, it just isn't going to last long. In my experience, it's better for kind of like getting the jump on enemies, basically getting an initial first round of a lot of damage with the Prowl ability, and then attacking with, multiple attacks from Wild Strike. But it just doesn't last. It's not tanky enough. If we were a Moon Druid, that would be a different story, but here, not so much. We do also get the Owlbear at this level, though, which I know I kind of focused on for Halsin's build, but that's just because it is one of the best wild-shape forms, allowing us to get Rage, a big chunk of hit points, and being able to do a lot of damage in a single turn. If you have to wild-shape, I'd probably go for the Owlbear. As for our prepared spells, we do get an extra one at this level, and it really is a pick your favourite situation. It really doesn't matter. Now here you have a choice. We're actually going to be going the rest of the way in Fighter here. So you have to decide what you want more. Do you want level 7 spells from Circle of the Land, or do you want the extra feat from Fighter? I'm personally going to be choosing the extra feat, but I will go over what level 7 of Druid is going to give you. It would give you an extra domain from Circle of the Land. Arctic giving you Conjure Minor, Elemental, and Ice Storm, which would be perfect for Jaheira, Ice Storm being her kind of like signature spell that she has in this game, as well as Conjure Minor Elemental allowing you to summon Ice Elementals as well, which could have a lot of utility. Coast would give you freedom of movement of confusion, probably don't pick that one. Desert would give you blight and wall of fire, probably don't pick that one either. Forest, no. Grassland, no. Mountain, no. Swamp, no. Underdark, maybe. Greater invisibility is pretty good. Arctic would definitely be my choice, though, if you went this route. And like I said, you would get Ice Storm as well as access to level 4 spells. You could pick up things like Conjure Woodland Being, Freedom of Movement, a bunch of different things, but overall, it's not essential to this build. The only thing you'd be missing out on is Ice Storm if you went to level 7, and if that's important for you, then go to level 7, but otherwise, I'm going to be instead going over to Fighter. Level 2 of Fighter is going to give us Action Surge, giving us an extra action once per short rest. Perfect stuff for a martial fighter, and for a spellcaster as well. Being able to spam spells like that is pretty nice. At Fighter level 3, we get to choose our subclass, and to be honest, it's entirely up to you what you want to go with here. Battlemaster would give you maneuvers, Champion would give you better criticals, but I am going to be going with Eldritch Knight. For a couple of reasons. One, Eldritch Knight is going to give us more spell slots, which is great. That means we're going to be up to level 4 spell slots by the end of this build, which means we get to hit the next tier of Flame Blade's damage. Again, if you want to focus more on maybe just the Flame Blade side of this build, you could just go like all the way in Druid, get level 6 spell slots and make that super powered. But I find that with this build's versatility, you're not going to need to rely on Flame Blade too much. It's just there if you want to enable certain strategies with this build, that again, we'll get into later. As for our cantrips, we're just going to pick some utility options here, such as Mage Hand and Minor Illusion, but really, it's a pick your favourite situation. As for our spells, we are going to get a couple, and again, since our intelligence is pretty low, we're just going to want to pick up some utility options. Shield would be my first bet. It's one of the best utility options in the game, immediately giving us more defense. Having this and Mirror Image up, which again, you should be able to do pretty consistently with our setup, you'll be very, very hard to hit. And you can also pick up something else here. I'd say Magic Missile is another good ranged option if you need one. It doesn't, even though it uses our int, it doesn't need it for the damage or, what do you call it? Attack to roll to hit, because it just automatically hits. I mean, it might have a little bit of an impact on damage, but overall it's still a very decent range spell. We also do get to pick a spell from the expanded spell list, and of course I'm going with Find Familiar. If I'm a druid, I want an animal companion at all times. Find Familiar. Just because I want it. Otherwise, pick something else. At Fighter level 4, we're going to be getting another feat, and I want to take an ability score improvement and bump up our dexterity, as now we're focusing on more of the martial side of things. We also do get another spell here, and unfortunately most of these are offensive, and we don't need mage armor because we are wearing armor. So, I don't know, protection from evil and good. It feels like something that Jaheira would have, but honestly, it's not incredibly important. At level 5, we're going to be getting extra attack, meaning that now we can make 2 attacks per turn with our main weapon. With the fact that we can be dual wielding already, it doesn't hurt as much getting it at this later level, especially when, again, you're going to be starting off with Jaheira at a pretty high level anyway, but if you wanted to focus on the fighter levels first and get this mainly, you absolutely could have. But the thing is like, with now that we have extra attack, there's actually a little bonus that comes with this. You know how Warlock extra attack stacks with regular extra attack? Well, as it turns out, the Wild Strike feature from Druid, which allows you to get an extra attack while in Wild Shape, also stacks with extra attack. So if you decide to Wild Shape with this build, you can get even more attacks, which is kind of nice. At least that was true last time I played. Maybe patch 6 changed that, but from what I understand, it's still the same. So, you know, let me know if I'm wrong. Comments engage the algorithm. And I just say things. And finally, at Fighter level 6, we are going to be getting another feat, allowing us to do one of two things. We can bump up our dexterity to 20, which is my personal choice, or if you feel like this build is not tanky enough, you can bump your constitution up to 16. But I prefer having my dexterity at 20. I mean, there is other things you can do here, but I wouldn't say any of them are necessarily too important. I feel like the ability score improvement is probably the better thing you can do here, so that's what I'm going to go with. And that is the build. Overall, what you're going to be getting out of this build is a ton of versatility. You have the ability to cast really useful battlefield control spells, buffing spells, offensive spells, the like. You're going to have the ability to wild shape if you need a bit of extra tankiness and different options for attacking. You're going to have the ability to go full martial fighter with dual wielding and powerful weapon attacks, and overall you're just going to have a bunch of different ways to tackle any situation, which in my opinion is perfect for a build like Jaheira. So let's get into the equipment. Now I haven't provided many, let's say early game alternatives here, because again you obtain Jaheira in Act 3, so in reality all equipment should be available to you. I will also quickly point out that I am wearing camp clothing with this build, and this is from a mod called the Extra Gear mod, which gives us like a special upgraded version of Jaheira's armor, which looks absolutely awesome, but I've installed another mod to make it camp clothing. So if you want to recreate this build, check the, at least fashion-wise, check the description below for the visual mods that I use. Otherwise, the rest of the build is completely vanilla. Just thought I'd make that clarification before people start asking. Anyways, let's get into the build. First off, our weapon of choice is Belm. This is from previous Baldur's Gate games. This is Jaheira's classic weapon, so I absolutely wanted to include it on this build, and it comes with a bunch of unique benefits. It is a +2 weapon, which is quite nice for us, but it also comes with perfectly balanced strike, allowing you to attack as a bonus action with this weapon. But here's something interesting. I don't know if this is a bug or specific to Flameblade or what, but in some of my testing for this build, I don't know if I still have the footage of it, but when I had cast Flameblade while I had Belm in my main hand, and it went to my offhand, so Flameblade was in my main hand, the perfectly balanced strike feature was still up, allowing me to use Flameblade even though it was in my main hand as a bonus action. Not sure if that's a bug, or if that's just something that works with Belm in the offhand. I'll have to do more testing on that, but if Belm can potentially allow any weapon to be used as a bonus action, that could be pretty powerful. Go ahead and test that for me in the comments. I might message my Discord about it as well. Join the Discord, by the way, if you want to get up-to-date something. I don't know. Just join the Discord. We have a lot of fun over there. But it also comes with a few, another extra benefit is the Ranger's Whirlwind attack. Yes, it's just built into the weapon, a level 11 Hunter Ranger feature, which is awesome, allowing you to, once per short rest, attack all enemies around you, making separate attack rolls against each of them, which is really fun, and you see it used in the combat footage quite nicely. Again, obviously our offhand weapon is Flameblade, and I will quickly cast it now for you. As you can see, it forces itself into the main hand, but we can plop it in the offhand. Look at the size of it as well. Jeez, Belm is a smaller scimitar anyway. Flameblade just makes it look tiny. Flameblade for us is going to do 4d6 plus 2 fire damage, which is actually pretty chunky. It lasts for 10 turns, and again, it can be dual-wielded as it is a scimitar at the end of the day, making it a light weapon. Overall, this allows us to keep Jaheira's dual-wielding style that she's known for, while also incorporating other things as well. I will quickly point out that I meant to use the Ring of Elemental Infusion with this build, because that is what we chose, because in theory, attacking with... Why does my mouse keep moving? Attacking with Flameblade should give that fire... Why does it keep doing that? My apologies, everyone. My mouse keeps moving on its own. So in theory, if we attack with Flameblade, using the fire aspect of it, it should buff Belm with fire damage, because Flameblade does trigger other kind of spell attack features, but no, unfortunately the Ring of Elemental Infusion does not work with Flameblade, so I had to make a last minute change. The Ring of Elemental Infusion would work with Produce Flame, but yeah, I don't think it's worth it. Produce Flame isn't exactly the best thing to use with this build, so I would just stick to the Ring of Elemental Infusion. I would stick to the ring I've chosen instead, or another ring of your choosing, because again, a reminder, I have to, with this series, not repeat equipment unless I forget, which I've done a couple of times, so I was a little bit limited on the equipment selection here. You might have better options, so feel free to change that around. So, let's get into the main equipment now. For our hat, we have the Pyro Quickness hat. Whenever you deal fire damage with a leveled spell, you burn yourself and gain an additional bonus action this round. So, because Flameblade is considered a leveled fire spell, whenever we attack with Flameblade, it triggers this feature, allowing us to get an extra bonus action, meaning we kind of have Thief Rogue just built in, at the cost of taking a little bit of fire damage each turn. However, this is still really strong. It allows us to go into an absolute flurry of attacks with Flameblade if we so desire. Our cloak is the Flesh Melter cloak. We just decided to kind of fill in this slot here. Again, you can't really see it because of the camp clothing, but again, this is kind of what the build looks like without it. Feel free to change the dies on this. And as such, it just means that whenever we're kind of in melee range and people are attacking us, we get to do a little bit of acid damage back to them. Our armor is the Armour of Landfall. It is a light armor which gives us a bunch of stuff that we love. We have a +1 bonus to spell save DC, which is great. We also have green bed regeneration, meaning that whenever we start our turn on a plant growth surface or a vine surface, we regain 1d4 hit points. I'm not sure if that feature is slightly bugged at the moment though, because when I was trying to test this build and I had a plant growth surface up, I wasn't healing, so that might be bugged. That might have to be a report. But the main two things we do get here is advantage on Constitution saving throws, which is awesome, and plant growth, allowing us to cast it for free once per short rest, not needing to use our spell slots on it, which is lovely. And again, it makes creatures have their movement speed quartered, so it allows for a ton of battlefield control. As for our gloves here, I've gone with the Legacy of the Masters, giving us a +2 bonus to attack and damage rolls with weapons. Just a little bit of extra oomph. And again, the Legacy of the Masters, Jaheira's kind of an old master. Yeah, I felt like it made sense. And finally, the boots. Now again, the boots are weird. Again, I can't repeat equipment from other builds, so we were kind of scrounging for something to put here, and I have a couple of options. Namely, number one, the Acrobat Shoes, which gives us advantage on dexterity saving throw checks. So if we're being hit with big AoE spells that require dexterity saves, like Fireball for example, we're going to be just as good at that as if we needed to, dodge something using our AC. And our AC is at 18 at this build, which is perfectly fine, but again, remember with Shield and Mirror Image, we're going to have this up. We're going to have this boosted quite a lot. Now, onto the but our other boots option as well is the Boots of Speed, which would allow us to dash as a bonus action, although I think I kind of prefer the Acrobat boots here. Next up is Khalid's Gift. Again, a very, very important item for Jaheira, both from her story. This is literally her necklace that was a gift from her husband, and as such, it comes with a couple of really good buffs. While wearing this necklace, Jaheira cannot be cursed. Very specific to Jaheira, which is nice. It also gives us a +1 to Wisdom, allowing us to do that whole starting at 17 shenanigans and bump ourselves up to an even 20, giving us a bit more ASI economy, let's say. And it also gives us a level 3 casting of aid, allowing us to gain a little bit of extra HP once per long rest, which is nice. It makes this build very slightly more tanky, but there was absolutely no way I was not including this necklace on this build, and that +1 to Wisdom alone was enough to make it worth it. Next up is the Keepsake Ring. I mean, this is just what I had to replace the Ring of Elemental Infusion with. It gives us Dominate Beast, which I felt like was appropriate for a Druid, but honestly, put anything else in this slot. If you feel like it would be more appropriate, again, you will not have the equipment limitations that I do, so it's whatever. And finally, the Band of the Mystic Scoundrel. After hitting a creature with a weapon attack, you can cast illusion or enchantment spells as a bonus action. Because Mirror Image is an illusion spell and Hold Person is an enchantment spell, you can kind of get a lot of versatility here. Basically, attack and then, if you need to, recast Mirror Image to keep your AC up high, so you're much harder to hit. That's kind of the main defensive strategy with this build, and remember, if you're using the Flameblade dual wield strategy, you will be able to have 2 bonus actions, so you're not really going to be slowing down your martial capability that much. But let's kind of get into the different modes that this build has really quickly. Again, we have ice damage things with things like Sleet Storm, Ice Knife, all that, if we want a bit more battlefield control, as well as plant growth and all that. But fire damage that we do with Flameblade would completely eradicate that, burning the plants and melting the ice, so don't use Flameblade in that instance. You're still going to have a bonus action attack thanks to Perfectly Balanced Strike, but you won't be able to get that extra bonus action. If you want to go into fire mode and go absolutely ham on the martial stuff, cast Haste, cast Flameblade, and go crazy. You can even with that strategy, Wild Shape as well, and get a bunch of extra attacks that way. There's a ton of different ways you can approach fighting with this build. I will say this build went, as for my testing purposes, and you know what, that is the build, so let's just get into the combat footage now. When it comes to testing this build, it was a little bit tricky. This build works best in a group. It's meant for kind of, while still being able to hold its own, maintain a level of battlefield control and support for the rest of the party. Jaheira leads the Harpers. It makes sense that she would be able to support and lead a group as well. So this build works best in a full party. You're not going to be lone wolfing with this strategy. But even on its own, this build works quite nicely. I decided to fight the Bull cultists that are attacking the refugees, because I felt like that made sense for what Jaheira does, and it works out interestingly. Obviously, I start off with Haste, Mirror Image, Flameblade, all that good stuff, oh no, I don't start with Flameblade, I cast it later, and I kind of go in and I start attacking, and I'm able to take out a couple of the cultists pretty quickly, but then we get into a problem where I get hit with Stunning Strike, which causes haste to go down, so I decide, okay, it might not be worth trying to keep haste up, let's instead use Hold Person and go from there, in which case I was absolutely able to destroy the main guy, and then take out the last one afterwards. So again, you kind of have to pick and choose when to do what with this build, and I decided to hold off on the Flameblade because I wanted to use the Plant Growth Surface as well, to get my enemy, to make it so the ranged enemies couldn't move away, which made it harder for them to hit me. But then, of course, when I got stunned and all that, I decided to switch to Flameblade, which burned the plants away, but allowed me to kind of get more damage off on the immediate problem. So again, you have to kind of pick and choose with this build. This build is not one of my strongest. It's not all about raw power. It is about having a bit of utility and being able to approach situations in different ways, while also trying to stick to what makes Jaheira Jaheira, the dual wielding, her special items, all of that sort of thing. I mean, there's definitely other ways you can do this. Yes, Spores Druid exists, but I just liked the overall feel of this build way more. But yeah, I mean, I don't think there's much else to say here. I mean, I'll leave the combat footage playing. But I am quite happy with this build. You really just have to kind of play into the kind of gimmicky strategies that it has to make it work. As for end of video stuff, I mean, I guess this build's going up next Wednesday. I'm recording this on the Saturday prior, so the day that the next livestream, I guess the last livestream would have happened, which would have been the deity build livestream, so hopefully that went alright. Be happy to see everyone again after I've kind of been a bit lax on the whole streaming thing, through no fault of my own, I will say, but hey-ho. And as for... oh, and I guess on Sunday the other modded build would have gone up. The first modded build. Oh, I hope that went well, because I really, really liked that video, so I'm hoping that went well, but who knows. Anyways. Yeah, unfortunately, I will keep talking here just because I want the combat footage to play out and not just be silent, but I honestly am not sure what else to say here. This is the problem with me recording videos so far ahead of time, is that I'm not exactly up to date on what's going on in the community. I mean, the biggest thing at the moment is still kind of like patch 7, when that comes out. I'm really hoping that does well. Is something vibrating on my desk? Some sort of alarm is going off. Please excuse me. Oh, don't you just love my professionalism? How I am so good, the video quality is immaculate, or I just have to stop because something's making noise on my desk midway. But anyways, yeah, I mean, I'm not really sure what else there is to say here, so I might just sign it off for now. As I said, feel free to join the Discord if you want to kind of get updates on new videos, get immediate notifications as to when live streams and new videos go up, be able to see sneak previews of builds that I'm working on, submit your own build requests. I collaborate with the community over there quite a bit with certain builds. I'm working on a bunch of different things, and obviously, like I say, tune into the live streams for a more direct and in real time sort of experience. I don't know at this point. I'm just rambling and hoping the combat footage is done by now, so I'm just going to leave it here. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all next time.